Most solder joints will fall within an acceptable range, but learning how much solder to add to create the ideal fillet shape can take a little practice. Just keep soldering one joint after the next. You also don't need to skip leads like you do with through-hole components. The reason is that the amount of heat required to melt a through-hole solder joint is much greater than a surface mount joint. The heat buildup inside surface mount boards is not a serious problem when the soldering is performed quickly and properly. Hand soldering each individual lead can be a rather tedious operation, which most companies would rather avoid. An alternate method, using a single-sided chisel tip, can melt solder into a whole row of connections in one continuous motion. Once again, this method begins with properly prepared lands. The position of lead number 1 should always match the corresponding land on the board, and all of the leads should be centered over each of the lands. This time, fluxing will be necessary. The flux will help to keep the solder from bridging between the leads. After you've fluxed all 4 rows, you need to make sure that the final lead to land alignment is exactly where it belongs. Now we're ready to tack 2 of the corner leads, just like we did before. After 2 opposite corners are tacked, we're ready to prepare the tip. First, make sure that the tip is properly cleaned. Now we'll need to add some fresh solder to the tip. You'll learn how much to add with a little practice. Then position the tip against the first lead and land in the row. As the tip moves from one joint to the next, the required amount of solder will transfer from the tip to the leads if you move at the right speed. You should be able to watch each connection form as you proceed. When you come to the end of a row, just keep moving the tip past the final lead in a continuous motion. If you stop the movement of the tip at the end of the row, you may end up with too much solder on the final lead or even a solder bridge. If you do create a solder bridge anywhere along the row of leads, you can just stop and reflux the bridge. Next, clean off any solder from the tip onto a damp sponge. Then reposition the tip on the bridge and remove the excess solder. Now you should be ready to solder the next row of leads using the same technique. After all of the leads are soldered, you may be required to clean the flux residues off the board. This should be done before they harden and become difficult to remove.